Welcome to my channel. My name's Bissy and episode 2 of The Vampire Lestat was incredible. In this video, I'm going to break down the episode and highlight important Easter eggs along the way. Plus, I've got a pretty large spoiler section at the end of the video. For all of you who would like to know more context or have an idea of where we could be heading with some of the threads. My reaction to this episode is live on my channel, so do check that out if you want to see my jaw hitting the floor on multiple occasions. If you're enjoying my videos, please let me know by hitting like and subscribe. It would mean the world to me. Okay, and with that said, let's get into the breakdown. Okay, so we begin with the Leon clause in the 18th century in Auvergne. We see just how their dynamic shaped the man that Lestat became, and ultimately at the root of the vampire he is now. A monk is speaking to Lestat's father about the gifts that Lestat would benefit from by attending their monastery for his education. His mother Gabriella wants Lestat to learn about Italian and Neapolitan philosophers. She corrects the monk to have him address her as he's answering her question. This exchange with the monk is our first and prime example of the treatment Gabriella received as a woman at that time. It shows that not even her nobility was a shield. As Lestat's father will not pay for his tuition, Gabriella finances his tuition with her brooch. And note, this is an Easter egg as Gabriella in the novel, she's Gabrielle, would often buy Lestat gifts instead of showing him softness and the love that he needed in that moment too. Also, in Season 1, Episode 1, Lestat explains to Louis's family that his mother used to lavish him with his beloved gifts. His flintlock rifle, his dogs, and in the novel, the chestnut horse too. Another thing to note is that Lestat's father's eyes become progressively more cloudy as the years go on. Now that, I believe, is a nod to the novel Interview with the Vampire, as an Easter egg, because by the time that he and Lestat travel to America, he is blind. Some years later, Lestat responds to Gabriella's challenge by going to do what his father and brothers would not. The villagers are begging for help with the wolves that are wreaking havoc. The Leoncourts are feasting as the villagers suffer. This is an interesting change from the novel, as Lestat's family were incredibly cash poor despite their nobility. Lestat actually used to hunt for their meat. Something else that I found interesting was that Lestat was actually loading his rifle before Gabriella screams for the men at that table to be men. Lestat loses his horse and his beautiful dog, but wins the battle against 8 wolves. This is how we learn how Lestat received his scars. Now in the novel, this story is really, really big. It's so impactful for him. And earlier on in the episode, or I believe actually it was in episode 1, Lestat said that he allowed the tale of the wolf killer to become his identity for a while. So I think and I hope that we will be coming back to this section again. As Lestat mourns, Gabriella rubs ointment into his open wounds as she recounts a dream that she had, where she felt that she belonged to no one. She was owned by no one. She is in control as she gropes Lestat as he cries on the floor. However, Lestat wants to be the only one who possesses Gabriella. As she walks away from him, the sound of her footsteps get louder and louder and louder as she walks further and further away. And that to me is the most powerful example that we have so far of what abandonment feels like to Lestat. Okay, so back on the tour bus, the band is understandably shocked and scared at the discovery that Lestat was not play acting. He's a real vampire. Lestat seems to be jealous that Daniel was flirting with Sophia, aka Gabriella. Sophia being the cover alias that she's using at this time. When Larry calls a band-only meeting, Lestat checks that Gabriella is still outside when she leaves the bus. Now I wonder, will Gabriella and Christine clash, or will they appreciate each other? I wonder because Christine has been acting as something almost as a substitute for the space that Gabriella usually fills. In episode 1, Lestat goes into almost childlike mode when he wants to take the car and Christine says no. And later on in this episode, during the call in the club, Christine says, call an Uber and go to Coffin, as you would with a teenager. Get home and go to bed. And of course, they're lovers too. Lestat finally answers the band's questions and they speak frankly. This is where we find that Alex is in recovery. He doesn't even swear, a man after my own heart, and it all gets just a bit too much for him. Now, I wondered if Lestat felt abandoned by Alex as he walks away, and Lestat leaves him with a stark threat. After the band meeting, we spend the night with Gabriella and Lestat. Lestat explains that Gabriella as a human was a complicated hang, whereas the vampire Gabriella is not. She's just arrived, but Lestat is already concerned about her leaving. We learn that Lestat saw her at only 2 points in the 20th century. Now, skipping ahead, I think we get an answer to when those 2 occasions were. Gabriella says to Lestat in the Italian restaurant, "I only ever saw the aftermath, your slit throat slow to heal, your rotten bathrobe sticking to your skin." So once, in 1940, after Mardi Gras, and the second, sometime before or soon after, Louis finds Lestat in his robe at the end of season 2. It brings to mind that quote, "If you need me, call me, but make sure you need me." Now, I just can't remember where that's from, but maybe you can help me out in the comments. But that just keeps running around my head whenever I think of these moments. We see that Lestat mimics Gabriella's speech. Of course, of course. Is this how Cabbage started? Lestat is the one who tries to set a boundary and says that they cannot continue their physical relationship. So their hunting kind of feels like a substitute for sex for them. Well, they try at least. And again, I think that's another nod to the novel, The Vampire Lestat, where I think they didn't go as far as physical sex, but they did kiss a lot and swap hot blood in their cold lips. Yeah, all of that. They follow their prey to a club, and Gabriella holds a pair of ping pong balls in the palm of her hands. And she really holds them in her hand. In fact, she tosses them. Whilst hunting, the Talamasca are watching them. Gabriella mentions the Great Conversion. Now, this proves that she knows the term. So she isn't quite as out of touch as I presumed. Is she involved? I wonder. Now, another note is that Lestat mentions that being with Gabriella is fun, just like finding party invites in the pockets of his victims. Now, that's a nod to the 1994 film, where Tom Cruise's Lestat says this to Brad Pitt's Louis. And I'm so sorry, I can't remember if this is in the novel Interview with the Vampire 2. And finally, Lestat has an unwelcome visit from a muse, his brother. A meeting with Mr. Pitt. Now, Christine arranges a meeting for Lestat to discuss the damage at the hotel, and Lestat has to pay in unconventional ways. Just as a side note, I found it hilarious that Lestat put on a shirt and a blazer to go and meet Thomas Pitt. Now, of course, this turns out to be Louis. Now, I wanted to add this comment here because I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And as soon as I read it, I couldn't believe that I missed it, but thank you so much, Angela, for bringing it to my attention. Such an amazing spot. Thank you so much. Now, we've seen the scene in the trailers, and I go over it in detail in one of my breakdowns. But what I wanted to point out is that I agree with Louis that it does feel like Lestat has been screaming for help, specifically from Louis. And Louis flew in, and he's here, whether Lestat likes it or not. So after the concert where Lestat floats up to Louis and hands him a copy of the book, we move on to Daniel and Louis' meeting. Now, just like the novel The Vampire Lestat, Lestat addresses his audience and says that he will be speaking for others, even if he wasn't there. Now, Lestat said it. He awakens the Queen and unleashes her wrath upon the world. Now, this is a spoiler that I'm going to go into quite some detail in the spoiler section. Point 1. Daniel speaks to Louis about his bond with Armand. He says that he experiences this thing where everyone disappears and he feels Armand. And on a side note, I wonder if this is how Gabriella knows when Lestat is actually calling out to her, because they can't speak telepathically. So now that Daniel has mentioned their bond in the show, I'm going to read some passages from the novels just to give you some context in the spoiler section. And that's going to be in point 2. In his conversation with Louis, Daniel speaks about his limitations and his motives for publishing after Armand turned him. Louis feels like he is chasing ghosts after he thinks he sees Claudia in New York. Now, spoiler section point 3, I'll be speaking about this specifically, but I will note here that there are ghosts within the Chronicles. And we may see Claudia in some form or another soon. Remember, she did promise that if there was a way, she would find it. Now, Daniel has hoodwinked Louis into meeting his producers, in inverted commas, those producers being from the Talamasca, Raglan James and Rashid, real Rashid. Now, I want to highlight one thing in this conversation. Now, Raglan is really emphasizing some words, his pronunciation of some words, getting us used to his speech pattern, I think. And I think this is going to be a really important point to remember going forward. Now, again, this is going to be point 4 of the spoiler section. And back with Lestat and Gabriella, we can see that Lestat is still sensitive about Claudia, even with Gabriella. And that warning look that he gives her says it all. And just a side note, it's at this point that I realised that Gabriella and Louis had never even actually met, as Louis didn't know that she was alive, and Gabriella seems fascinated by his picture. I mean, she was staring at him during the concert. Lestat sings in French to the melody that he was writing when he and Louis were FaceTiming. Remember, Louis called it nice? This song plays over the scenes of Gabriella's turn-in, and the massacre of their family plays out. Now, this is a change from the novel The Vampire Lestat, and I absolutely love that we're in uncharted territory with this. Now, at the start of the sequence, we see that Lestat is talking to Nicholas, but it ends with Lestat listening to the screams of his nieces and nephews as they discover their parents' bodies. Now, you can see that Gabriella is taking the glasses off of Lestat's face just before he turns her, and I think this is her discovering his true nature by seeing his eyes, the change in his eyes. Lestat then goes on to try and justify his and Gabriella's relationship, a knowingly weak attempt in my opinion. And it seems that he thinks so too, because he gives up pretty quickly. Okay, and back to Raglan and Rashid. What on earth happened in Dubai? Now, was this after Louis' speech at the end of season 2? He gave his name, he gave his address. I wonder, and 32 were massacred. Now, the 32nd is a very interesting one. Louis mentioned that Daniel Talbot was victim number 32. Now, if you saw my reaction video, then you saw my face as soon as Louis mentioned this name. I've been waiting for this name to be dropped, and I can't believe it has. So please refer to the spoiler section, part 5, for more details. I'm going right into it. Now, the main thing that I took from this exchange was even Louis is able to be manipulated by the Talamasca. He, of course, would have gone after the Fang Gang if he knew who their leader was. But they are enlisting him to do their work by giving him the motivation that serves him. Which doesn't feel very good to me. I don't know, how about you? Okay, so that brings us very nicely onto the spoiler section. Now, if you do not want to be spoiled, now I think is a good time to click off. And if you do, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next one. However, if you are going to stick around, I just wanted to point out a couple of things from last week that I want to speak about. Now, I misspoke when I said that I was pretty sure that Magnus was pulling out Lestat from the ground. Now, I had said Magnus's name so many times in that video, I had stopped hearing it. So thank you so much for everybody who pointed that out. I tried to get back to each and every one of you, trying to explain, but there were a lot of comments. But I meant Marius. So I am sorry for any confusion. Also, when I was speaking about their limbs, I said the word grow, but what I really meant was restored. That is actually what Eleni says in the novel. So again, I really do apologise for any confusion. Okay, so with that said, let's get on to point 1. Now, Lestat actually said it. He said that he awakens the Queen and unleashes her wrath upon the world. Now, this is basically the plot to the Queen of the Damned. So Queen of the Damned takes place at the same time pretty much as the events of the Vampire Lestat. However, in the novel, we hear from Lestat the details of the build-up from many different characters' perspectives. Now, we are going to meet Marius very soon, I hope. And Marius is the current keeper of those who must be kept. And if you cast your mind back, you might have caught Lestat's slip in season 1 about those who must be kept being in Greece. I won't spoil how, but eventually Lestat is introduced to those who must be kept, who, of course, are Akasha and Enkil, the Egyptian king and queen who became the very first vampires, the source of all vampires. Now, Akasha is taken with Lestat from afar, and she visits him at night, although Lestat doesn't quite know or understand what he's being faced with. Eventually, Lestat's music awakens Akasha, and boy, does she have a war to wage. Now, I think I'm going to leave it there, but this is very significant, as I think that Louis and Armand's injuries might have been inflicted by Akasha during these events. Okay, so moving on to point 2, Daniel and Armand's bond. So I think the best thing for me to do would be to read a little bit from The Queen of the Damned for you, because I think this is a really good example of what Daniel might have been explaining to Louis in that conversation. Have a listen to this. So in part 1, The Road to the Vampire Lestat, chapter 4, The Story of Daniel, the Devil's Minion, or the Boy from Interview with the Vampire. He'd awakened with a sense of urgency, dread. Something terrible going to happen. Something going to happen to all of us. And that was the first time he'd connected it with Lestat. He'd wanted to pick up the phone then. It was 4 o'clock in the morning in Miami. Why the hell hadn't he done it? A man would have been sitting on the terrace of the villa, watching the tireless fleet of white boats win their way back and forth from the night island. Yes, Daniel? That sensuous, mesmerizing voice. Come down and tell me where you are, Daniel. But Daniel hadn't called. 6 months had passed since he had left the night island, and this time it was supposed to be for good. He had once and for all forsworn the world of carpets and limousines and private planes, of a quiet, overwhelming presence of his immortal lover, who gave him every earthly possession he could want. But now it was cold, and he had no room, no money, and he was afraid. You know where I am, you demon. You know what Lestat's done, and you know I want to come home. What would Armand say to that? But I don't know, Daniel. I listen, I try to know, but I'm not God, Daniel. Never mind. Just come, Armand. Now that's not very far into the chapter, and to me this is a great example of how Armand and Daniel are bonded. Now at this point in the novel, Daniel is still mortal. He hasn't been turned just yet. He wants to be, but he hasn't been. But we know that this is very different to the show. But I think the bond is still there, and it's very much, I think, what Daniel is explaining to Louis, although he doesn't quite understand it yet. Okay, and point 3 is Claudia's ghost. So also in the novel Queen of the Damned, there's a character named Jessie who meets Ghost Claudia in the old home in New Orleans. Now she is actually the one who jumps on stage in the book, and Lestat feeds on her, over Baby Jenks in the show. Plus, she's also a descendant of a very, very important character that hasn't yet been mentioned in the show, but I'll be right onto that as soon as they do. Now, I know that there are more details about Ghost in the book Merrick, but unfortunately, I haven't gotten that far just yet, I'm afraid. So I'd love to see readers of the book's comments about what happens in that book. But please, 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 before you do, please add a spoiler warning at the beginning of the comment, just to respect anyone who doesn't want to be spoiled. Thank you so much. I'd really appreciate it. Okay, so point 4 is Raglan's speech pattern. Now, I tried not to give everything away last week, but that quickly got out of control. But very briefly, Raglan is a rascal. We've seen evidence of this in Talamasca, where he tricked Guy Anatole. But he also tricks Lestat, and Lestat finds himself stuck in Raglan's body, on a quest to get his original body back, with help from somebody who I'm going to mention in point 5. So in this episode, I believe that we're seeing the real Raglan in his own body. It seems like we're getting to know his mannerisms, his distinctive speech pattern, also that we might be able to spot the differences in time. However, I have to also wonder if something else is going on, as it all seems so on the nose, if that makes any sense. But at the same time, maybe I'm just looking too closely, and people who don't know what might be coming might not pick up on these clues until the season's done. Now, that was very much the case for me when I first watched seasons 1 and 2 with Armand. I mean, I don't know. I could be wrong. I could be completely misunderstanding. What do you think? Okay, so now we get to point 5, David Talbot. Now we meet David in The Queen of the Damned, and we really get to know him in The Tale of the Body Thief. Now, David is Lestat's friend and mentor, and he's a Talamasca agent who is very, very skilled and gifted. He's also instrumental in Lestat's quest to get his body back. Now, this is a major, major spoiler, but David doesn't want to be turned. He wants to remain human. But during the course of the book, David also switches bodies, and Lestat turns him by force. Now a vampire, David also takes down Armand's autobiography in The Vampire Armand. Now, I haven't finished The Vampire Armand yet. I had to put it down. It is very, very heavy, for me anyway. So that's all I can comment on right now. But I have to wonder, is David actually dead? Given his special skills, i.e. he can jump into other bodies too. But at the same time, I did wonder whether we would ever see him, as the character Daniel has been given many of his qualities, namely his age, and the fact that he's conducting interviews with vampires other than Louis. So I wonder if Daniel might end up switching bodies at some point too. I hope not, but I do wonder. Now that's all of the spoilers for this week. Thank you so much for watching. I can't wait to read your comments, but please remember the spoiler warning. And so now we wait for episode 3, and I cannot wait. So if you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe, and I will see you next week. Thank you. Bye.